as long as they can fight with Russia by Ukrainians using Ukrainians, they're gonna do continue this war.
Oh
But
yeah.
as soon as they get, because just assume what has happened in the West Asia, how Donald Trump was begging them to come to the Strait of Hormuz. They said, no, we're not going to sacrifice everything with their soldiers, their weapons, and they say they knew that nothing positive going to come out of that fight if they come to the Strait of Hormuz. I don't see them being that courageous to participate in an active on the ground war with Russia. They know they're gonna fail, and that's gonna be devastating for them.
Well, there's the problem. They don't know. In Iran, first of all, in Iran, they weren't going to help Trump because Trump created that issue. They didn't have an issue with Iranian or Saudi oil leaving the Straits of Hormuz, even though it's all Iranian or Omanese waters. It's never been closed. It was open throughout the time. Either Iran had the right to close it, Oman had the right to close it, but they never did. Now Trump created Trump created what Trump created, and now what do you do? Except now Trump wanted them to go fight and die, 100% death rate. Go in there and start shooting because it's really easy. We could do it ourselves, but we're not going to do it. You do. The Trump approach. Oh yeah, this is really cool and easy. Why don't you try it? We'll just stand back and watch. Yeah. Well, the British sent one destroyer, and it broke down by the time it got into the channel. So the Queen of the Seas is now the strumpet of the pond. She can't get her ships out even to into the channel barely. They're using patrol ships and cutters to grab the Russian shipping. Well, it's not necessarily Russian shipping. The Shadow Fleet, just everything that's not insured by Lloyd's of London. A lot of those ships aren't Russian to begin with. Sometimes I'll try hoisting a Russian flag, but they're not registered in Russia. They're not registered as Russian ships. But either way, it's piracy. I mean, it's privateering, whichever way you call it. And Russia's now threatened. Russia's now said that its policy is now to grab European ships, and they can do it in multiple oceans. And in the Pacific, they've been tracking 400 ships, which, to put it mildly, the British and the French shite themselves. And here's, by the way, an interesting point. If you believe that artificial intelligence is going to tell you the truth, garbage in, garbage out. Just for fun, I did a comparison on Google of of the British, French, and Russian navies, and as I said, the British and the French are sophisticated modern navies that can project force all over the world. The British can't get out of the channel right now. They can all over the world. Meanwhile, the Russian Navy is bigger but bulkier, and it's old and outdated, and it can't go very far except like around the world. But besides that, there's artificial intelligence for you. So yeah, if you don't know anything and you believe artificial intelligence, you'll still not know anything, except the propaganda it feeds you. But yeah, the Russian Navy can go after these ships in up and down, the Pacific Ocean. The U.S. Navy is in no position to try to play tag with the Russian Navy, as we've seen, and the French. Well, the French. Okay, so the land power of Russia has a bigger fleet than both France and England put together. The English have about 60 ships of all different sizes, including supply ships and everything else. The French have about 170. Russia has over 295. If you're going to chase a tanker down, you're not going to send a destroyer or a cruiser to chase a tanker down. You're going to send a frigate, or you're going to send a corvette, to chase it down and board it. And yeah, the French and the British, they have nothing that they can do. And by the way, the biggest, because Russia didn't say just France and Britain, they said European Union. Because while France and Britain have actually grabbed ships coming in and out of Russia, so they weren't all Russian ships. The other countries have helped them. But the two countries that will get hit the worst is going to be Norway, Maersk, and Greece, who are the biggest two carriers of products in Europe. And Greece, by the way, is carrying a lot of Russian energy, but because it's on a Greek ship and Greece is the home of democracy, and by the way, authoritarian powers like Sparta too, but who's counting? But because it's in a Greek ship and Greece is the home democracy, those authoritarian molecules are becoming freedom molecules as they travel. So yeah, or Americans that buy Russian LNG and then resell it to the Europeans at a freedom markup of 30-40%. Um, Nobody said the European Union was full of smart people. So that's the reality of it right now. Is they're now paranoid because Russia was never supposed to do anything. Well, Russia hasn't done anything yet. It's put out the word. I'm quite hoping they do it because it needs to reinstall deterrence, and that would be a shock to the system. It'd also be a shock to Lloyd's of London because they're going to have to be. They will be sued to pay out. They're going to say force majeure. It's an act of war, and we don't have to pay out. And then companies are going to start asking, well, why the hell are we insuring with Lloyd's of London, which is not cheap, when we have insurance in many other countries now, including Russia and China, and I think India even has insurance, its own insurance companies. And Lloyd's of London's going to lose money no matter how this goes. And that's London City losing money, no matter how this goes, which is good.
Are they still buying Russian oil and gas via Turkey and India? I'm talking about Europeans.
Well, no, they're not buying Russian oil via India. They're buying diesel and gasoline that India refines from Russian oil and then paying the Indians. Of course, this last time, because there were hits and it was a driving season, and Russia always very often imports extra gasoline during the summer. It doesn't produce enough gasoline for the heavy driving season, while producing about 70% of, well, globally, it's 16% of the world's diesel that's exported on the global market. And most of that was like 70% of the EU's diesel came from Russia earlier. So yeah, the Russia produces a lot of diesel, but not enough gasoline for the big driving season, which is summer. People going to vacations, and because of that, Russia always imports. But there were hits that temporarily put down some refineries, stopped work for. Most of these refineries are down for 2, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month at the most, and then they're back up and running at full. Well, Russia, India didn't get much choice, and Russia bought 400,000 tons of fuel, petrol and diesel from India, made from Russian oil, and went back. And the Europeans are stupid enough to go, Russia has to import oil. I mean, oil goods. Yeah, but that's 400,000 tons that didn't go to the European Union, the main customer. So it's like, keep laughing, keep laughing. That's the fuel that you're not going to be driving on. And Europe now has that predictable escalating crisis. It's only going to continue escalating. So you're dealing with those kinds of people. But the U.S. has on multiple occasions bought Russian LNG and sold it to the Europeans as American LNG. Well, American companies have done that. I don't know if it's an official U.S. policy, but American companies have done it with a freedom molecule upcharge. I mean,
Five
freedom
times
is not cheap.
more
Yeah.
expensive.
Freedom's not cheap, baby. You got to pay for freedom. Open your wallet, be generous. You got to pay for freedom. And the Europeans pay for freedom all the time. Well, what they call freedom, anyways. So that there's that little bit of a problem. Now, Russia supplies diesel to Iran and has for quite a long time because Iran's even worse on a refining position than Russia. Iran doesn't plus, the Iranian refineries have been hit also. So Russia's keeping Iran afloat with diesel, which Russia has tons of. And when they say, Russia's running out of diesel because it won't export, well, Russia never exports diesel starting from, I won't say never, but the last couple of years there's been a ban. Starting from late March and running through usually September, because all they want to keep the prices low for the agriculture sector.
Mhm.
Because depending where you're in Russia, uh, you can start the planting season in the south starts in mid March. The planting season in the north and the Siberian plain, particularly the northern Siberian plain, western Siberian plain, it starts around mid May. Now
Mhm.
in Siberia, they get one harvest, but it's an intense because it's constant daylight, so the plants grow pretty fast, right? Depending where you're at, it's 24 hours of daylight. While in the south, obviously it's not, but because the ground it's black earth, you stick a broom handle in it, it'll sprout leaves. That it's you get two, sometimes even three harvests out of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and during that time between planting and harvest, Russia doesn't export diesel, and the European Union, because they know how to negotiate. Last May, were demanding Russia start exporting diesel. Demanding,
Mhm.
you know. Yeah, well, they took their demands and they got them shoved somewhere. So it just got ignored. But they're paranoid because their economies are looking at an insane shock this fall, this winter, and I'm pretty sure they have no plans on what they're going to do, because these aren't exactly the people that plan very well. So
Mhm.
it's not going to be fun.
It seems that Jared Kushner and Witkoff they want to go to Russia. They're in the West Asia, and it seems that they're gonna get there and to talk. What do we know about the position and who's gonna talk with them? Is it gonna be is it going to be Kirill Dmitriev, or are we gonna see Lavrov participating or seeing maybe negotiating, talking with them? What do we know about that?
Lavrov will not be talking with them. Lavrov has never talked to them. Well, no, not officially, anyways. Maybe a cocktail party. Lavrov has only talked to Rubio. Uh, these two, they're not in any official capacity. They are not. They're not government officials. Um, and they talk to a non-government official, Dimitrov.
Mm.
So they get met on their level. Putin may meet them again, shake hands, listen to whatever they have to say. At this point, Lavrov just reiterated. Lavrov is on the hard right. When it comes to this, to escalating, and Lavrov just reiterated that Russia's not leaving any of its positions until all the mission statements of the SMO are complete, which includes basically the destruction of the Ukrainian military. So, from that point of view, I think for a lot of people, Lavrov, for Medvedev, Rogozhin, and others, they've and I'll say myself included. Not that I'm a big player or anything, but it's all going to get settled on the battlefield. I mean, there's nobody in the West you can trust
Mm.
except Fitzo and Babic. And in a big scheme of things, they're low rank people. So what? Macron is going to come. Let's make a deal. They've been pushing through Turkey and the U.S. A Black Sea deal. Like, wait a minute, ceasefire. Who started shooting? Ah, okay, yeah. And now that you're getting your behind smacked, you want a ceasefire. Russia gave them a lot of ceasefires before, and it all blew up in Putin's face when he did that. So I don't think there's any desire to go back to it. One, for example, was the energy ceasefire that in Russia was advised not to do it, but the Russian government did it anyways. I guess because Trump was asking for it. And over 30 days, Russia didn't hit any energy infrastructure in Ukraine. There were even several drones that were blown up remotely that were already en route to energy sites. How many times did Ukraine hit Russian energy sites in 30 days? 48 times.
Oh,
Yeah. So again, and by the way, it was the West and Ukraine asking for this ceasefire. So you can't trust anybody there. As by the way, I think Iran has figured out too. There's nobody there you can trust. At least not the people that represent Trump, uh, and definitely not the Europeans. There's nobody there you can trust,
Who's
unfortunately. But
yeah, Stas, do you think that when it comes to the relationship between Russia and Germany, what do we know about the political system in Russia? What is your understanding? Is there any possibility to get back to do that relationship before the war started between Russia and Germany?
on a political or economic side,
Economic
on
side.
economic, no, never.
Ah,
It's done. On several reasons. By the way, Putin and properly said, we're no longer going to be playing this game. You went back into the Russian economy. Now, the few German companies that stayed, they're fine. Um, most 70% of the world's companies in Russia, they never left. They may have rebranded. Many just didn't rebrand at all, just stayed as is. But the majority of ones that left, Germany was probably disproportionately the majority of theirs. Well, BASF, for example, told Berlin to go screw themselves when they said close your giant plant in Russia. I said, hell no, we're not leaving Russia. They've left. By the way, they left Germany. Their other big plant is now in China. So yeah, that slightly backfired on the German government. One of their oldest companies went, yep, bye bye. But other companies like Siemens left. And the response from the Russian government to these companies is if you want back in, it's going to be case by case, joint venture only, and technology transfers. The same thing that China did. So you're no longer getting a free entry. You're no longer getting a free ride like you had it. It's done. That is done. On top of that, a lot of these niches that the German companies had is gone. I'll give you a very simple example. One of my friends was an IT director at one of the biggest paper milling companies in Russia. So before all this started, Russia would send those giant rolls of raw paper to Germany. Germany would produce all kinds of paper goods out of it. For example, toilet paper. They would produce, the computer paper. They'd produce, any paper goods, cardboard. In this case, we're going to talk about cardboard, and then ship it back to Russia. Well, not all of it, obviously, but a good chunk. Most of Russian cardboard and office paper came from Germany. So Germany embargoes everything, that sanctions everything in Russia. Well, the Germans for a couple of months were having problems getting toilet paper, and all the German print newspapers shut down because they didn't have any paper. Whoops. But on the flip side, on the Russian side, so Russia has tons of raw paper, and now what do you do with it? Russia started producing all of its own office paper, and for a while it was beige because they didn't have the whitening elements in there set up. So and then it went back to being white. Personally, I prefer the beige. A lot of people actually prefer the beige paper. It's easier on your eyes than the bright white paper. And my friend's company was producing this big rolls of raw paper. In 2 years, they opened up 4 factories to produce cardboard. So 80% of Russia's cardboard now comes from this one company. And their competitor produces the other 20%. Both are Russian companies. The Germans will never come back to this niche. It's closed. The Russian companies invested, they now have production, and the Germans will never, in any kind of capacity, be able to compete on price with Russian cardboard in Russia. Russia might, if the wall ever comes down, would be able to flood Europe with cardboard and further drive the Germans out. So yeah, markets like that are, those types of niches are gone. There's nothing to come back to. And any other niches that aren't, as Putin said in a speech yesterday, it's going to be a case by case. A, and B, it's going to be with joint venture technology sharing. We're not playing this game anymore. And just to put the case by case, Chevron and Exxon try to get back into Russia.
Mm.
And from very good sources of mine, when they met with Lukoil and Gazprom and Rosneft, Lukoil executives, Gazprom executives, Rosneft executives were told very bluntly by the Russian government, we don't need to see them here again. There's nothing for them in Russia. And
Mm.
Exxon and Chevron left those negotiations empty handed. That's it, gentlemen. We don't need you anymore. You don't have any technology you can bring that we haven't either invested in and developed or in the process of developing. And other than that, sharing our wealth with you, why? There's no reason. So all the things that the Western companies grabbed in the 90s, for those that were stupid enough to leave, there's no path back.
Here is Stas, the map of Russia, because you've mentioned the black earth, and for many of us we don't know in which where does this located. My assumption is because since they mentioned it's coming to Ukraine, it's going to be this area. Yeah.
Oh no, it's much bigger than that. It's actually, if you should be able to find on the internet a map of the Black Earth. If
Yeah.
you type in there, I've seen maps of them before, where they show
Let
you
me just
overlaid. And by the way, the Black Earth, there's a little bit of Black Earth in Germany, and it got there because during World War II, a lot of the German trucks, transport trucks that were coming in, bringing supplies for the Wehrmacht, were going back laden with Black Earth that they were stealing out of occupied territories.
yeah. Let me just find it here.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. I had a map of it once. See if I can find it again. I'll send it to you real quick. Yeah, that's it.
Is this
Yep, that's it.
okay? So the
Wait a minute.
whole
No,
area
yeah.
here is just goes into Ukraine, goes to Belarus as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but that area in Belarus is um well, is that Black Earth? It's actually no, that's not Black Earth, I don't think. What is it? No, that's not Black Earth.
I don't know.
Or is it? Well, it says it
It's
is,
really black
but
earth belt.
the Black Earth goes further than that. That's not fully it.
You mean that
Uh,
comes here to this region as well?
no, no, no. Actually, it starts. No, not in that region. No, there's down to Crimea, almost to the edge of Crimea, is Black Earth. There's also Black Earth that goes into Kazakhstan, um, and yeah, Voronezh. They got Voronezh, Saratov. Yeah, those areas are correct.
Yeah, you mean
Belar.
comes to Kazakhstan?
Yeah. Well, not quite that far south, but further west,
Mm,
because Kazakhstan's also steppe. It's just if you go further south, like you drew, that area becomes very salty. Because
yeah, but
I
the
used to
black
work.
earth, the use of the black earth is for agriculture, if I'm not mistaken. It's just
Oh yeah, absolutely.
it's basically it's about the you know
Here, I'll send you. I'll send you a map. Here, 1 second. Uh, it's an old map, but it's a like either Soviet or pre-Revolutionary War, pre-Revolution Russian map. But 1 second.
yeah,
Yeah, check.
just got it.
Yeah, that's a better map.
Let me just bring it up here. Then you can show us here on the map. Yeah, it's. Did you send it?
I send it over Telegram.
But it's a web page. It's not a photo.
Is it? No, no, no. I send it as a. It's a map.
Let me
It's an
just.
image.
It's quite.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
out of my gallery. I copied it in.
Let me just check it out here. Then we have it here.
Yep, that's it. So yeah, that's your black Earth. And the darker, obviously, the better. So mostly
Mhm.
Ukraine, Moldova, the North Caucasus, and then it goes off
Oh, it goes to
into.
the Black Sea. Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah. Because
it
that
goes
area was.
down.
Yep, that area was steppe, and again, it's color coded. Just how bad, how much, how rich it is. So the darker, the better.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay. Thank you, Sas, for being with us today. Great pleasure,
always a
as
pleasure.
always.
Same, same. And no offense to the tax serfs in Europe, but the leadership is inbred
Yeah, we're not
mouthfeeders.
talking about the people. We know
Yeah.
that the people, and nobody has any problem, because the people in Europe, in Russia, I would say, in the United States, they don't have any sort of problem with each other. This is all about the
Well, I won't go
government.
that far. The unfortunate part is there's still quite a few people that are brainwashed and believe what their politicians tell them.
Yeah,
That's the unfortunate part.
yeah,
That's if you look at Germany, for example, Germany's a prime example. East Germany was denazified, which,
mm,
by the way, why they get called Nazis because they want to have peace and have normal energy policies and none of that woke idiocy and so on. Oh, that's the new version of Nazi. But Western Germany was never denazified. They removed the Nazi symbols, yes. They put in jail or hung the top leadership, yes. And then the second and third tier leadership of the Nazis went right back to power.
mm,
Generals went back to Wehrmacht. Gestapo went into the new intelligence services. A lot of them went to work in the U.S. and became honored citizens, and so on and so on. So West Germany was never denazified. So a lot of those people are grown up on those idiot ideas of revenge
mm.
against the Soviets. Well, we almost got to Moscow this time.
This is sad.
Of course,
Yeah,
last time
we
they,
see somehow.
yeah,
Yeah. Mertz somehow just comes out of Mertz.
well, look at that idiot journo that asked Zelensky in Belgrade, "How can we Europeans help you kill Russians?" Well, soldiers, Russian soldiers. Yeah, yeah, that's what I meant. His grandfather was a Wehrmacht colonel, I think, or a general.
Mm,
So that's it's stuck in the family. Let's put it that way,
yeah.
because they were never denazified. Yeah, okay, we have to apologize. We killed a bunch of Jews. Well, you killed a bunch more than Jews, but they stop at that. We killed a bunch of Jews. But okay, we're sorry for that. We're not sorry for the Poles, the Russians, the Greeks, and everybody else we murdered. We don't even want to know about that. And it was such a pathetic thing that I was watching a video where the guy on the street video, they start asking people on the street, and they're asking a bunch of the German youth, college age. Bad enough Americans are clueless. Well, the Germans. When did World War II end? 1890 something. At that, this is Germans at that level. Like, geez, and this is the people that don't get marched off into another war because they're too ignorant to know anything about the previous war. They don't even know what century it was in.
Yeah.
So they're very
It's
easy to
unfortunate.
manipulate and push them into another one.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Thank you, Sas. See you soon.
Thank you. Yep.